I'm just waiting for cut to the auditorium. Stop the video, cut to the auditorium. Request all of you to please take your seats. There are a few more outside. We're just waiting for them to join in. Sorry. Good evening and warm greetings to all. I'm honored to welcome you all to the Silver Jubilee Inaugural Celebration and the first IHD Silver Jubilee Lecture. I am Priyanka Tyagi. I'm the Senior Manager, Program Administration and Communication with Institute for Human Development. It is indeed a very momentous occasion for all of us at IHD. Established in 1998 by a group of social scientists, the Institute for Human Development was founded with the vision of commitment to quality and social research for inclusive growth and development, to excel in academic and policy research, and contribute in building an equitable society that fosters social and economic inclusion. Moving with this vision in the past 2.5 decades, IHD has been involved in several academic activities like building knowledge for human development, undertaking and promoting research, building research networks, disseminating information and knowledge, engendering debates and discussions, and so on. It is a proud moment for the faculty and staff, including me. I am very honored that I've been part of this journey since more than a decade now. Before we formally commence the proceedings of this event, I would like to thank all of you for joining us here live to witness the event live, and all the people who have joined us on Zoom. I understand there are more than 250 people, and more are joining in, and on YouTube. More than 1,000 people registered on Zoom for this event, and I really, we are still seeing numbers increasing. This event is live on our IHD YouTube channel. After the lecture, I'll not be able to say this, so you're welcome, all the people who have joined us on Zoom and on YouTube. You are welcome to place your messages, your Q&As on the Q&A tab on the screen, and on YouTube, you can engage with us through the comments box. It is now my privilege to invite the dignitaries who have played an important role in establishing the Institute as a premier research institute in India. It is my honor to please welcome Professor S.R. Hashim, Chairman of the IHD Board of Governors, to kindly grace the dais, sir. Professor Deepak Nair, Member of IHD Board of Governors and eminent economist of international repute. Sir, kindly grace the dais. Professor Hajun Chang, the person who is delivering the first IHD Silver Jubilee Lecture, Distinguished Research Professor, SOAS University of London, please grace the dais, sir. Professor Ravi S. Srivastav, the Director of the Center for Employment Studies at IHD and a member of IHD Board of Governors, to please grace the dais. And the Director of the Institute for Human Development, Professor Alak Sharma. Sir, it is my honor, and with great respect, I invite you on the dais, sir. It is now time to introduce the person who leads the Institute, Professor Alak Sharma, Director of the Institute for Human Development. Professor Sharma is a development economist who has made significant contributions to research in varied areas such as livelihoods, labor migration, poverty, employment, labor markets, political economy, and related issues. Professor Sharma is also the editor of the Indian Journal of Labor Economics, the Quarterly Journal of Indian Society of Labor Economics, and the Indian Journal of Human Development, the journal that is brought out by IHD. Professor Sharma, Alak sir, as we call him, is the soul of the Institute, who leads us from the front. In the past 2.5 decades, Professor Sharma has worked relentlessly to place the institute in the position it is today, a leading research institute in the country. Those who know Alak sir personally would agree with me when I say that Professor Sharma breathes IHD, lives in IHD, lives IHD, and he has been a mentor for all of us. All the entire IHD team is sitting here, including me. An absolute honor, sir, to invite you to commence the proceedings of this event. Please.
Thanks, Priyanka. Professor Hazun Cheng, Professor Hasim, Professor Nair, Professor Ravi Srivastav, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Institute for Human Development, I express my sincere thanks to all of you for joining this inauguration of the IHD Silver Jubilee celebration and first IHD Jubilee lecture. I am particularly grateful to Professor Hazun Cheng for coming all the way from London for delivering this first IHD Silver Jubilee lecture. As you know, Professor Hazun Cheng is an internationally renowned scholar. The topic of his lecture, the holistic approach to development, is very close to the vision and work of IHD, and I'm sure you will like it. Friends, since I am starting the function, welcoming you, it will be very appropriate probably for me to tell you briefly, very briefly, I have no time, you will be waiting for the lecture, to tell you the history of IHD. It was formally registered as an institution under the Society Registration Act on 15 January 1998, and now has completed 25 years of its establishment, and hence this Silver Jubilee celebration. But in informal way, IHD had started working at least since November 1996. The birth of IHD is somewhat interesting and different from other similar institutions. The need of an institution of research which could undertake independent research and disseminate knowledge on labor market, employment, livelihood, and other development issues was realized by a group of people which comprised, I was also part of it. Besides me, Professor Hasim, who is sitting with us, Professor T.S. Papola, who is no more with us, Professor Rudradat, who is also no longer with us, Dr. Rohini Nair, who passed away 1.5 years something back, Professor Mahendra Dev. All of us were also fairly active in the Indian Society of Labor Economics. As most of you probably might be knowing, ISLE, Indian Society of Labor Economics, is a 65-year-old association of economists, social scientists, practitioners, and other professionals interested in labor and employment issues. I was editor of Indian Journal of Labor Economics at that time, and even now I continue to be its editor. This group, which I mentioned you, discussed this idea in the core larger group of Indian Society of Labor Economics, which wholeheartedly endorsed this idea. Later on, Executive Committee and General Body of Indian Society of Labor Economics formally approved it. ISLE Research Trust for Research and Development was established, which in turn established IHD formally on 15 January 1998. The first Board of Governors, it is very appropriate that I should mention, Professor Hasim, who was then Member Planning Commission and later on became Member Secretary Planning Commission. He was Chairman. Professor T.S. Papola, Dr. Ashok Chandra, Professor C.P. Thakur, he was in Faculty of Management, Delhi University, Professor Ashok Mathur, JNU, no longer with us, Dr. Roni Nair, Professor George Reyes, Professor Riddurat, and myself. But after this, several other people, I should mention, Ravi, Mahendra Deo, Avijit Sen, were also closely associated with, and most of them were especially invited in the Board of Governors. I was then working in the Institute of Economic Growth. And when the institute formally got registered, I left my job and I joined full-time in IHD and took up the responsibility. Since then, it has been a fulfilling journey for me and most of the people associated with IHD. Professor Hasim had relinquished the chairmanship of the institute in April 1998. And then Professor Y.K. Alag, who died very recently, he remained chairman of IHD for 15 years till 2013, from 1998 to 2013, and guided the institute for a long time. Then in 2018, Professor Hasim was requested to again join as chairman. In this journey of 25 years, just to tell you briefly, I have no time, we have published something like 70 books and monographs, completed more than 400 projects, organized more than 200 big and small seminars and conferences, have been able to form a rather wide network of researchers and professionals working on labor and employment and human development issues, not only in India, but also in South Asia and some other countries of Global South. We have been involved with training of labor researchers of South Asia for a long time. We have done research, primary research, almost in all states of India. We have a Eastern Regional Center at Ranchi for the last 15 years, working on backward in eastern states of India. Under the institute, we have Center for Employment Study, which is headed by my colleague Ravi Srivastava, Center for Gender Studies. Ministry of Tribal Affairs has designated as Center for Excellence for Tribal Development Issues. There is a Delhi chair on human development issues, and we are bringing out third human development report. Already draft is ready. We have a huge database on labor market and employment. So just to give you some highlights, some major works are human development report, several for 7-8 states of India. As I said, we are in the midst of third Delhi human development reports. We have prepared tribal human development report, which is likely to be released on the behalf of Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Government of India, very soon. Several state development report. We have a Bihar longitudinal data study program of 36 villages, longitudinal data since 81-83. We have brought out 2 India employment reports, third employment report, with support in partnership with ILO is coming. ISD hosts Indian Society of Labor Economics. Indian Society of Labor Economics, as I told you, has established ISD. But entire activity of ISLE is conducted by IHD. Its 63rd conference is going to be held in Itanagar, Arunachal Pradesh, 1st, 2nd, 3rd March. Priyanka and I and my colleague Jyoti are leaving tomorrow morning at 5 o'clock for Itanagar for preparation. We also host Indian Association of Social Science Institutions, a association of social science institutions which was founded by Mr. Tarlok Singh and Mr. K.R. Narayanan. We publish Indian Journal of Labor Economics, as I told you. It is in 65th year of publication. We also publish, it is published by Springer. We published Indian Journal of Human Development, currently 15 years. It was released by Professor Amartya Sen in 2007. To me, it seems IHD has established itself as an independent research institution on labor, employment, and human development issues. I would like to mention that all these have been done without any regular funding, all based on project funding. We have a rented space of only 4,000 square feet and also a rented space in Ranchi. A small regular faculty and research staff, altogether maybe 35, 40 IHD family, but a network of several well-known visiting and honorary professors from Delhi, outside Delhi, from outside India, who are committed to the work of the institute and regularly contribute. Although no regular funding, IHD produces public good. As I said, 2 journals host Indian Society of Labor Economics, in which every year 500 to 600 researchers come every year. Many of you are coming there in Itanagar. Also host Indian Association of Social Sciences Institution. On average, at least 10 researchers from outside Delhi come to consult us on data, labor, some article, all that. So IHD works as a public institution with no public support. In this channel, we had support of several people, some of whom we have lost. Dr. Ajit Ghosh, who was a visiting professor, a friend of Hajun, a product of Cambridge University. After retirement from ILO, for the last 13 years, he has been working, and only 1 month back, he has brought out something, technology and employment working paper. In 2016, he brought out India Employment Report 2016, a seminal work. I am grateful to his wife and Ruchira Ghosh and daughter Paroma. He died only day before yesterday. They are here. He was cremated only yesterday. Professor Alag, who was chairman 15 years, we lost only 2 months back. Dr. Rohini Nair, 1.5 years back. Professor Abhijit Sen, Radha Krishna, about a year back. Professor Deepak Majumdar, who was a great source of strength, a visiting professor, produced several studies under IHD. My colleague Preet Rastogi, who was also joint director, a colleague who was for 25 years with IHD, he died recently, SP Sharma. Earlier, Professor Ashok Mathur, CP Thakur, many more. So we are very indebted to all of them. We have now, which will be just released, a plan of action for the next 7 years. Professor Hasim will release it. I'm not going to elaborate on it. We have a formidable board of governors. Professor Hasim, the chairman. Ravi is sitting. Professor Sudipto Mandal is sitting, chairman of Center for Developmental Studies. He's on our board, chairman of the personal committee. So I'm grateful to all the board members for their support in this journey. I hope that this journey of enriching labor market, employment, human development research will go and will be strengthened with all your support and patronage. Thank you very much for all of your support and attendance here, presence here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. As per the program, there was a screening of an audiovisual documentary. We deeply apologize. Due to unforeseen reasons, we could not do it, but very soon the documentary will be out on our IHD YouTube channel. Professor S.R. Hashim was formerly a member, secretary of the Planning Commission of India and former chairman of the Union Public Service Commission. He is the chairman of the Institute for Human Development, as Alak sir just said. He has held prominent positions at various academic institutions and served in the Planning Commission of India as advisor, principal advisor, member, and member secretary. He was ambassador of India to Kazakhstan. He has worked and written extensively on issues relating to poverty and inequality, water and agriculture, and small-scale industries. And as Sir said, he was one of the founding members of the Institute. He put his initials on the Memorandum of Association of the Institute. It is now my privilege, sir, to invite you and all the dignitaries on this dais to kindly come here on the stage and release the IHD Plan of Action 2023-2030. Anisha, I request my young colleague Anisha to please get the Plan of Action here. Sir. Yes, this is the photograph moment. And sir, this does call for a round of applause, realizing the fact that economic and social policies must complement and reinforce each other so as to able to increase the impact of growth on human development. This plan has been prepared by IHD for its research and other activities in the coming years and is rooted in this new economic and social scenario. Thank you so much, sir. Please. I now invite Professor S.R. Hashim, Chairman of the IHD Board of Governors, to please address the gathering.
Professor Deepak Nayyar, the chairman of the session, Professor Chang, Professor Srivastava, and Professor Alak Narayan Sharma, and friends. Alak has indeed very briefly given you the history of the Institute since its establishment in 1998. I will here add something a little to that history, which Alak himself did not say or perhaps could not say. I will not take much time about it. It was indeed 25 years ago. This is the beginning of our Silver Jubilee celebration, I think this whole year, and this is the first event. So 25 years ago, or even more, we conceived of a think tank which would exclusively devote itself to the issues of human development, poverty, employment, education, health, human development index, and many other issues which arose. And with the help of the friends, Alak has already mentioned them, Professor Papola, Professor Rudradat, Professor Rohini Nayyar, Professor Alak, and a number of other friends, we succeeded in establishing the Institute of Human Development, registering it in the sense of simply the registration. But in the words of Tagore, I should use here, we started on our journey with empty hands, but expectant heart. And I must say, now after 25 years journey, our hearts are really full with joy, seeing the progress of the Institute today, the work that has been performed. The credit, many friends, of course, were together with us. Their wishes, good wishes, their goodwill was with us. But the institute did not have any assured means of resources. And yet we started. What Alak did not say, that is what I'm going to add. It was solely due to the involvement, due to full devotion of Alak Narayan Sharma. Who was a young man at that time. He still is, he's quite young. When compared to us, he's still a boy. He gave up his regular salaried job in one of the institutions of repute and took up this work as director without any assured regular payment by way of remuneration or salary, without even assured project on which one could work, and then started working. I must admire that. And then got some projects where all the friends helped, there is no doubt about it. And we lived project after project. That is how the institute has. And it still does, even now. In fact, it's a matter of both joy and as a matter of satisfaction, great satisfaction, that institute doesn't receive any government grant, and it is quite independent. Yes, we do receive from time to time projects. Projects are from the government, from the ICSR, from international bodies, and from many other, in fact, he has mentioned, which go to finance. And today the budget has grown to be quite substantive, and the activities are even more substantive than perhaps the budget would satisfy. So this is what I wanted to add. And then a few words about the background, in fact, in which the institute works, the background of the ideas and projects on which the institute focuses. You all know that from 1991, there was a turning point in Indian economic situation after liberalization, globalization in a way. And there was a significant improvement in the rate of growth, which earlier for 4 decades had hovered around. At that time, we thought 3.5%, but now when you go back to look at the data, perhaps it is 4.5, not too bad, but it was still a low rate of growth with the revised series. Here is a former head of the National Income Division. Series have been revised many times. But even that was not significant because population was growing at a very high rate. 2.2%, I think, was for quite a long time was high, and therefore per capita income improvement growth was very low. It was only in the 90s that growth went beyond 6%, 7%, and then later on for some period even 8-9%, touched 8-9%. And by that time, the population growth had also started declining, coming down to less than 2%, 1.5%. Therefore, there was a very significant gain in per capita income, more than what is reflected in growth of GDP. This brought many changes, which we all see. And this growth, of course, was spurred by new technology. And filled the people with enthusiasm. One great contribution of this growth was that attitude towards education, the people changed. Those people who were reluctant to send, especially in the rural area, reluctant to send children to school, now saw the benefits of education. But at the same time, yes, growth also resulted in reduction in poverty, which is again on record. The poverty has declined, though has not vanished completely. And still in terms of numbers, since Indian population is very large, the population of the poor people is still millions and millions. But this decline in poverty is for a concept of poverty, which evolved more than 50 years ago, 50 or 60 years ago, which revolved around a poverty line measured in terms of the minimum food requirements and something around that, anchored in minimum calories. There have been revisions in poverty line. Something more has been added from time to time, and latest which the government follows is Tendulkar Committee report. But basically, the concept of poverty has remained the same. It's my feeling that this concept is totally outdated. The pattern of life has changed in half a century. The consumption pattern has changed. The concept of essentials of life has changed. And therefore, there is a need to radically look at the poverty in different ways, very different ways. And in this context, let us remember that with the expansion of urbanization and with agriculture shrinking job opportunities in the rural areas, there is a migration to cities for jobs. For migrants, shelter is the most important. In cities, if you have a shelter, you have a job. But that shelter is uncertain. It adds to vulnerability. And that vulnerability you could see in times of crisis like Corona crisis, Corona epidemic, how migrant people particularly suffered. So even in countries like USA, now in thinking of poverty, they think of shelter first, whether the person is able to have a foothold properly in a city. If not, he is vulnerable and he is poor. And there are many other vulnerabilities which arise. Essentials of consumption have changed. It's not just the calorie requirement. In fact, calorie consumption has been declining over time. And sometimes people wonder why, because other things have become more important for consumption. What growth has brought about is also tremendous amount of inequality. Technology, which has proffered growth, which has also created a jobless situation, replacing labor. Capital has become much more profitable, and in fact, it is reflected in return in GDP, share of capital and labor in GDP. Capital share of labor has been constantly declining. And now it will lead to new problems. Inequality means concentration of income in a small section who cannot spend it. Large sections of the population who want to spend, who need to spend, do not have the power to spend. And in the wake of prosperity, we very often hear lack of demand and call of recessions. Looks like a paradox. USA now has declared it's going into a recession. And main reason is lack of demand. The stores are closing. Maybe the situation is not yet so apparent in India, but it is bound to come. It's not so apparent because still the demands are of a type where people somehow keep spending. So we have to think about this and think of the ways of negotiating this situation. Unemployment, same technology creating a jobless situation. And the employment that is available, the quality of the employment is declining over time. Vulnerabilities I have already talked about. And environment is a problem because of the growth itself. I think growth is also impacting at a faster rate on deterioration of environment because of the use of energy, which is increasing. And if environment deteriorates, again, the worst sufferers are the poorer sections of the society. In fact, every crisis affects them much more than others. So therefore, there is a lot for the Institute to remain focused on. And if you look at the action plan, which has just been released, it mentions the future of work of the Institute, which is growth and employment, how to make growth inclusive, employment and interest. I will not go into the details because I think the booklet will be distributed. It will be in your hand. Just to mention the headings: education and skill, health and nutrition, gender and development, vulnerability and social protection, governance and institutions, climate change, and environmental sustainability. Other activities of the Institute are teaching and training, public debates and policy dialogue, network building, and communication outreach. These activities will continue, in fact, will strengthen. I'm sure that IHD will continue to contribute significantly to research and engage in dialogue and human development issues. With these words, I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. It is now time for the first IHD Silver Jubilee lecture, which is being delivered by Professor Hajun Chang. He is a distinguished research professor at SOAS University of London. Previously, he was at the Faculty of Economics at University of Cambridge. In addition to numerous journal articles and book chapters, he has published many co-authored and authored books and edited several books. His main books include The Political Economy of Industrial Policy, Kicking Away the Ladder, Bad Samaritans, 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism, and Economics, The User's Guide. His latest book is Edible Economics, a Hungry Economist Explains the World. His writings have been translated and published in 45 languages and 46 countries worldwide. His books have sold over 2 million copies. Professor Chang has advised numerous international organizations, national governments, civil society organizations, and corporations, both private sector and public. He is currently a member of the CDP, Committee for Development Policy, the highest advisory body of the United Nations on development issues. Professor Chang is the winner of 2003 Gunnar Myrdal Prize and 2005 Vasily Leontief Prize. So we are extremely honored that you are delivering the first lecture. This lecture is being chaired by Professor Deepak Nayyar. He's Emeritus Professor, Jawaharlal Nehru University and former Vice Chancellor, University of Delhi. Professor Deepak Nayyar is Emeritus Professor of Economics at Jawaharlal Nehru University and Honorary Fellow of Balliol College, Oxford. He previously served as Vice Chancellor, University of Delhi and Distinguished University Professor of Economics at the New School of Social Research, New York. Earlier, he taught at the University of Oxford, University of Sussex, and the Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. He's the chairman of the Institute of Development Studies, Sussex in the UK, chairman of the Center for Study of Developing Societies, Delhi. He was also chairman of the board of the World Institute for Development Economics, WIDER, Helsinki. His professional life in academia has been interspersed with time in the world of public policy as the chief economic advisor to the Government of India and secretary in the Ministry of Finance. He served as the member of the World Commission on the Social Dimension of Globalization, as member of National Knowledge Commission in India, and as vice chairman of the South Center, Geneva. His research interests are primarily in the areas of international economics, macroeconomics, development economics, and economic history. Professor Nayyar has published numerous articles and several books, and he is the president of Indian Society of Labor Economics, a member of IHD Board of Governors, and has helped us immensely in strengthening the activities of the Institute. I request Professor Deepak Nayyar to take the reins of this session in his hands and kindly moderate the lecture.
Thank you, Priyanka. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Professor Arjun Chang to deliver the first Silver Jubilee lecture to celebrate the Institute of Human Development coming of age.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. I would like to add to the tribute that Alak paid to two of my friends, Ajit Ghosh and Rohini Nayak, two people who work tirelessly to improve the lives of working people in India and beyond. I also want to thank the Ruchira Ghosh, the Ajit's wife, who was one of my first teachers of economics in her former life as an economist when I went to Cambridge. I also want to thank Deepak Nayyar, who has been a mentor to me in the last 20 years in my research and teaching. I also want to thank the friends, Rabi, Sudipto, Shumajit, Nitya for coming. Also my the students, former and current, Anu, Kaveri, Amrita, Sangeet. Thank you all for coming to listen to me. And I'm sure that there are some people who I have taught or have been friends with who are listening online, so I cannot see where you are, who you are, but thank you to everyone. It is my great pleasure and honor to give the first of the IHD Silver Jubilee lectures. It's titled The Whole Beast, towards a more holistic approach to development. I mean, that the meaning of the title will become clear as I proceed in the lecture. Now, what we understand to be development discourse, that is the discourse on economic and social transformation in the, yeah, that just keep it on the title page, please. The discourse on economic and social transformations in post-colonial societies has gone through huge changes in the last 8 decades since the end of the Second World War. With the end of the Second World War, starting with Korea and Taiwan, the second and the decisive wave of decolonization began. Of course, there was the first wave in Latin America in the early 19th century when those countries gained independence from their Spanish and Portuguese colonial masters. And in the first 40 years or so after the Second World War, the development discourse was dominated by what may be called historically informed structuralist political economies. Quite a mouthful, but these are all very important aspects. In this approach, structural change of the economy and consequently society through industrialization fueled by the transfers of investable surplus and underemployed labor from the rural to the urban sector was considered to be at the heart of economic development. The advocates of this approach highlighted the historical legacies of colonialism and imperialism that affected the development path of post-colonial societies. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, even to the extent that some advocates of so-called dependency theory believed in this structurally deterministic view that true development in post-colonial societies is impossible unless they exit the existing global economic system that had been built through imperialism. The approach was political economy in the sense that class dynamics and power relationships in economic activities were explicitly recognized. So, for example, land reform and central planning were suggested in explicit recognition that those who control investable surplus in post-colonial societies were generally not willing to invest in transformative projects. To cite another example that might be familiar to this audience, Abhijit Sen and others provided an explanation of the so-called farm size productivity paradox by emphasizing the supervision constraints that stem essentially from power struggle in the labor process in the agricultural sector. However, in the next 4 decades, development thinking has been dominated by a totally different approach known as the neoliberal approach. Now, this approach is called neoliberal because it's an updated version of classical liberalism of the 19th century with some modifications to accommodate the 20th century realities. Yeah? So, for example, the 19th century liberals openly rejected democracy. Yeah? Their view was, if you give votes to poor people, they'll vote in governments that destroy private property, which is at the foundation of the prosperous economy. In the 20th century, the neoliberals cannot quite do that. So they grudgingly accept democracy, but they suggest all kinds of things to weaken it. Yeah. So give independence to the central bank, give create political independent regulatory bodies. The World Bank at one point even funded programs to set up autonomous revenue agencies. I mean, these used to be known as tax farmers in the old days in countries like Kenya and Rwanda. I don't think anything came out of it, but it has gone to that extent. Yeah. So basically, take out all the important things from politics And whatever is remaining in the government, in the hands of the politician, needs to be strictly controlled. So rules on the balanced budget, ceilings on the national debt, rules on regarding the ceilings on the budget deficit, what have you. So that these people formally accept democracy, but they want to neuter it. Anyway, so that's the one aspect. But another difference between liberalism and neoliberalism is that the neoliberals actually enthusiastically embrace some things that the liberals used to reject. Two most important things are central banking and intellectual property rights. These are two things that the 19th century liberals used to reject as artificially created monopolies. Yeah, and indeed they are. The Economist magazine, which is famous for being liberal in the 19th century sense, I mean, used to openly be part of this the Europe-wide campaign to abolish patent law. Because these people argued that if you want competition, you want competition everywhere. Why should the ideas be different? The 19th century liberals, and in the 20th century, there were a few people like Hayek who advocated that, if there's competition, there should be competition in the supply of money too. So don't give the currency issue monopoly to the central bank. Let the banks compete, and whoever maintains its currency value the best should get the control over the currency. Anyway, so the neoliberalism is different from liberalism in these respects, but there are the common elements. So that it is an individualist worldview that rejects, or at least is hugely skeptical of, any idea of collective entity and collective goals. Ethically, it gives the priority to economic freedom over social, political, and cultural freedom. And most importantly, considers the freedom to exercise private property rights as the most important thing. So this is why the 20th century neoliberal gurus of the free market, namely Milton Friedman and Friedrich von Hayek, both supported the murderous military regime of Chile. Because for them, what was far more important was that you get rid of this socialist government of Salvador Allende, which actually wasn't that socialist, but that's another story. So that the private property owners can exercise their property rights to the full. And if that means sacrificing democracy, so be it. I mean, for them, the foundation of civilization is in the private property, not in democracy. As you all know, like the 19th century liberalism, neoliberalism strongly believes in the efficacy of the market. Sorry. And mistrust the state and other collective organizations like trade unions. Last but not least, it believes that free international flows of goods, services, and capital are almost definitionally positive for all parties involved, although they do not mention that they do not support the same free flows when it comes to international migration. This is a very obvious contradiction. Why are you in support of free flows of everything except for people? Yeah, there are a few neoliberal economists who actually openly support well, at least very much freer than today, if not completely free, the labor migration. I think of the names you might recognize, I think T.N. Srinivasan was one of those the tiny minority of neoliberals who at least tried to be consistent, but the consistency gets in the way of the good stories, so that people don't usually opt for that. Now, the early structuralist development discourse that dominated the first 40 years of post-colonialism had its problems. I mean, I am very happy to discuss these later if you are interested, but for today's purpose, I'll just leave it at that. But the dominance of the neoliberal view of development in the last 4 decades has led to a very narrow, biased, and if you like, sugar-coated view of development, which has produced very poor results. I mean, I'll try to give you some quantitative evidence on this. This is because basically the neoliberal view leaves too many important things out of the discussion. And they do that because these are not very palatable to those who benefit from the status quo. So this is what I call the selectivity bias of neoliberalism. But secondly, also because it judges things on a very narrow ethical basis. And I call this the individualistic bias. And I'll discuss them in both of them in due course. But let's begin with the selectivity bias. There are actually 2 aspects to this selectivity bias. The first is the presentation of history, and the second is the topical coverage. I'll explain what I mean by this. So first of all, in terms of history, in the neoliberal discourse, the importance of the relationships of domination through colonialism, unequal treaties, and unfree labor like slave and indentured labor in the development of capitalism are seriously downplayed. Sometimes these things are not even mentioned. Yeah? So you read that stuff on globalization and it was all kind of, everyone holding hands and singing Kumbaya kind of picture. Yeah? Even if they are mentioned, they are in passing. For example, in his 300-page book on globalization titled In Defense of Globalization, Professor Jagdish Bhagwati, I checked the index, mentions that imperialism and colonialism only 3 times each, and all in a tangent. Yeah? They are not main topics. Yeah? Even when they are mentioned, they get only a marginal coverage. Yeah? For example, that in a 600-page plus tome, Power and Plenty, subtitled Trade, War, and the World Economy in the Second Millennium, the eminent development economist Ronald Findlay and the economic historian Kevin Rook devote 7 pages to imperialism, and that mostly imperialism of the 19th century, and 2 pages to slavery. Yeah? While the persecution of Native Americans by the colonizers that get only a few scattered mentions. Yeah? Now, to their credit, they clearly condemn these things when they mention them. But when these things occupy only 1.5% of the book, you begin to wonder how much weight are they giving to these things. Yeah? For another example, to their credit, Jeffrey Sachs and Andrew Warner, in their famous 1995 Brookings Papers article called Economic Reform and the Process of Globalization, which starts with their overview of the globalization process in the last few centuries, they do mention imperialism and its violent nature, which is actually quite unusual for a mainstream article, but they do not even mention slavery a single time. Yeah? And I'm not talking about the crime against humanity that this institution called slavery committed, even in purely economic terms. Yeah? Throughout the 19th century, cotton and tobacco, the 2 main slave crops, accounted for up to 65% of US export. Yeah? In the 1830s, cotton alone accounted for 58% of US export. Yeah? So without these 2 crops, the US would have developed much more slowly, because this would put it in a very serious balance of payments constraint. Yeah? I mean, just imagine, that 60% your export is gone, or is that almost all of it, because it will be now so much more expensive to produce without the slaves, how would your economy fare? So slavery was not just that kind of marginal institution that was practiced by some inhumane southern landlords. It was central to the US economy, and they don't even mention it. So that's the first aspect of this misrepresentation of history. No mention, or at best a marginal and partial mention of the relationships of domination. The second aspect is that, okay, never mind whether these institutions of domination, relationships of domination were crucial in the development of the capitalism in the Western countries. The other side of the coin, the long-lasting impacts that these relationships have left on the weaker societies that were subject to colonialism, unequal treaties, and other forms of imperialism are not recognized. And I'm not even talking about complex things that which I don't have the competence to talk about, like collective psychological trauma, the national inferiority complex, imitative thinking by the elite. Even in purely economic terms, very straightforward economic terms, the neglect of the impacts of imperialism on the subjugated societies is staggering, and it has serious implications. For example, in recommending free trade based on the logic of comparative advantage, mainstream economies often tell developing countries to increase the export of their natural resources. We've heard it all the time. Next slide, please. But what are natural resources? Because a lot of things that you think are natural are actually products of someone else's industrial policy. The Brits that brought tea and rubber and other things to India. That coffee is originally an African crop. It was brought to Latin America by the Spaniards and the Dutch and the French. I mean, cocoa is a Central American crop, but now the biggest cocoa producing countries are in Africa and Asia. The list is endless. I mean, this is just a selection. So what are we talking about? Natural resources. And in using this language of nature, backed up by this total kind of whitewashing of imperialism, somehow gives the impression that the countries that are trying to get out of primary commodity dependence are doing something unnatural. But there is no nature here. These are all man-made outcomes, especially someone else's industrial policy. The third aspect of misrepresentation of history is what may be called beautification of the West. Great efforts are made for emphasizing the virtues of Western, especially Anglo-American, political and economic institutions, and science and business culture. The works of people like Douglas North, Daron Acemoglu, apparently you should read it as Acemoglu, according to my Turkish friends, but so many people read it as Acemoglu, that will follow the practice. Acemoglu and Robinson, the so-called legal origins literature led by the Mexican-American economists La Porta and so on. These are all geared towards showing that the Western, especially Anglo-American political and legal systems that most importantly limit the ability of the state to appropriate private property is the best for economic development. I don't have time to go into the critiques of these individual arguments, but in presenting the evidence for their arguments, these studies retrofit their modern ideal into history. So, for example, Acemoglu and Robinson talk about inclusive institutions that countries like Britain created, which say countries like China apparently don't have today. But if you read actually European history, Britain in the past was notorious for its inegalitarian system. I mean, other countries people from other countries in the 17th, 18th century that often commented on the inequities of British institutions. One concrete evidence I can give you is as late as in the Boer War in the early 20th century, it was found that recruits in the army from the working class were 5 inches shorter than the recruits from the middle class. I mean, you call that society inclusive? Joel Mokyr, David Landis, and many other historians sing praises of rationalist Western culture that enabled them to get ahead in mathematics, science, and engineering, despite the fact that the most important scientific and engineering progresses before the 16th century, at least, were made in China, India, and the Arab world. So by emphasizing the virtues of this Western culture and institutions, Western dominance over the rest of the world is implicitly justified. And of course, most of these people wouldn't explicitly say these things. But why are they doing this? To the extent of totally distorting history. And then this next slide, the aspect of rewriting the history of the imperialist countries themselves. I mean, I pointed out in this book, Kicking Out the Ladder, and the next slide, please. Bad Samaritans, that the rich Western countries of today all develop on the basis of protectionist and interventionist policies rather than free trade, free market policies that they advocate today. Next slide, please. For example, in terms of trade policy, you will see that most countries on this table use protectionism, at least to a substantial extent, during substantial periods in the earlier phase of economic development. Particular offenders were the supposed inventors of free trade, that is the UK and the US. I mean, they were literally, for most of the 19th and early 20th century, the most protected economies in the world. Some of you might be wondering, oh, that guy, that he has lived in England too long. There are only about 15 countries, almost all of them European, and he says it's the world. But when it comes to tariffs, actually this is the world. Because most countries that do not appear on this table didn't have the right to set their own tariffs, either because they were colonies or they were subject to unequal treaties. So Portugal is one country that's missing, but Portugal very peculiarly for a European country that was actually subject to unequal treaty with Britain. There's this Methuen Treaty of 1803, which basically deprived Portugal of its tariff autonomy, namely the right to set its own tariffs in relation to English goods. So it wasn't a full-scale unequal treaty, but with at least one country. Finland is missing, but Finland was a Swedish colony for 600 years until the 1809. After that, it was a Russian colony, you know. So actually, almost all the countries that had the right to set its own tariffs are there, and you see these numbers. You know, it's not just tariffs. You know, I mean, they violated other people's intellectual property rights, center, left, and right. Yeah, I mean, they used massive subsidies to promote particular industries. Not all of them, but many of them, used state-owned enterprises very heavily. You know, I could go on, but you know, that's, you know, there's no time for that. Yeah, in this, I particularly want to highlight the role of unequal treaties, because compared to colonialism and the other aspects of imperialism, this actually gets the relatively little coverage. Can we move to the next slide? Oh, hang on. There should be, sorry. Yeah, no, I should have talked about these guys. I mean, this is Robert Walpole, the so-called first Prime Minister of the UK, or rather Britain at the time, who basically invented all this interventionist trade and industrial policies, which, next slide, then was theorized by Alexander Hamilton, the first ever finance minister, or what they call Treasury Secretary of the United States, in the form of infant industry argument. Yeah? So you know, these two countries are particular offenders in the rewriting of history. Yeah? Britain did not invent free trade; it invented protectionism. Yeah? Next one, yeah. And in this book, I you know, try to highlight the importance of this the unequal treaties. I mean, the book, all the chapters in the book are titled after a food item. Yeah. So there's a chapter on chili, you know, spices, garlic, acorn. Yeah, you didn't know that you could eat acorn, huh? But we eat a lot of acorns in Korea. Yeah? You can find out if you read this book. Yeah? I'm not trying to sell this book to you, because my policy is that if your country's per capita income is less than $10,000, please go ahead and pirate copy my books. Yeah? Just don't tell my publisher, because I grew up reading pirate copied books. Yeah, I'm not going to kick her the ladder. Yeah? Kick her the ladder of knowledge. Yeah. Anyway, so in this book, I point out that you know, in the standard neoliberal historiography, you know, the story has it that, you know, when Britain, which had already been practicing free trade in most other areas, finally kicked the habit and abolished agricultural protection in the form of the Corn Laws, which protected British grain producers against cheaper foreign imports. It became the, you know, the hegemon over new global economic order, and it was the first free trading nation. But this is not true. Yeah? Well, first of all, Britain didn't abolish most of its protection until the 1860s. Yeah? But more importantly, the first countries that practiced free trade were the Latin American countries. When they became independent between 1810s and the 1830s, they were forced to sign these unequal treaties. Yeah? So they were deprived of the tariff autonomy. They also had to accept this thing called extraterritoriality, which means that the court systems of these countries were considered subpar. So if the citizens of stronger nations committed crime, they had to be sent back home. Yeah? They cannot be possibly tried by these you know, corrupt and underqualified judges. Yeah? I mean, that was the reasoning. Yeah? Yeah, except that in most European countries at the time, you didn't have to be trained in law to become a judge. Yeah, yeah, that practice really started in the Muslim countries. Yeah, yeah. So after that, they imposed unequal treaty on China after the Opium War, 1842. in 1853, Japan was opened up by the Americans. They were forced to sign unequal treaties. And in the 30s, the Ottoman Empire, Persia, the Thailand, I mean, almost all the countries that were not colonized were forced to sign these unequal treaties. So actually, Britain's claim that it was the first free trading nation is false. But more importantly, this shows that free trade doesn't mean actually freedom in other aspects. No, when you think about it, free trade simply means that there's no barrier to international trade. It doesn't mean that the citizens of countries involved are all politically free. It doesn't mean that the nations are trading as equal partners. So paradoxically, indeed, the late 19th, well, not late, between mid-19th century and the mid-20th century, free trade was mostly practiced by weaker countries that were colonized or were subject to unequal treaties. And countries that had the freedom to choose the tariffs, almost all of them practiced the protectionism. I mean, this is when you think about it, a gross the rewriting of history. But we accept this without thinking. Okay, yeah, Britain, the first free trading. I was like that in the beginning. Because everything you read says that. So you have to do a lot of detective work. But actually, the interesting thing is that, in order to write these books, I didn't have to, I don't know, hack into the secret database in the IMF, or go to some, I don't know, Italian monastery to read some forgotten 17th century manuscript. They're all there if you know where to look for. I mean, I got almost all the data from libraries in Cambridge and the internet. But you don't even know that they are there. Because you have been brainwashed with this version of history, which says rich countries succeeded because of free trade. You guys didn't because you are protectionists. And last but not least, in terms of history, the history of development in today's developing countries is also rewritten. So the periods of state-led development in the first 40 years of post-colonialism are portrayed as unmitigated disasters. And the current neoliberal period is praised for having revived all these economies. One common phrase you will have heard is, now the world is richer than ever. Isn't it that proof that neoliberalism works? But this is such a stupid argument when you think about it, because as far as you keep growing, world will be richer than ever by definition. The question is, could it have been even richer? More evenly richer? I'll show you some evidence. So that if you go to the next table, the developing countries as a whole used to grow faster during the bad old days of 60s and 70s compared to the next 40 years. The gap is particularly striking in the case of Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa, two regions that were, for various the good and bad reasons, forced to implement IMF World Bank style structure adjustment program to the letter. So that you go to Latin America, a lot of the people will say, oh yeah, we had such a disaster with the import substitution. Now we are much better, except that your growth rate is now 1/4 of what it used to be. In the 60s and 70s, Africa wasn't doing great, but 1.6% growth is nothing to the scoff at, because that's actually on the higher side of the growth rate that the European countries racked up during the Industrial Revolution, during which they exploited the rest of the world to death. So this is actually not too bad. A quite respectable rate of growth. And in the next 40 years, it fell to 0.3%. Actually, in the 80s and 90s, it was negative. 0.3% over, 38 years. What does that mean? This means that per capita income in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa today is 6% higher than what it was in 1980. 6% in 38 years. China used to grow that much in 6 months. And these people say that we have saved the continent. Okay, let me not get too worked up about this because once you know these things, I mean, there are so many holes and lies and inconsistencies. It's difficult to avoid them, but you need to kind of wake up to this, like that blue pill, red pill in the movie Matrix. You need to take the right pill. Okay, so that's the first aspect of selectivity bias. The second aspect, if you like, the missing bits. The second aspect of the selective bias is that neoliberal arguments leave out those gritty things that reveal the complicated and conflictual nature of the development process. So first of all, the production is not mentioned. It's all market. Liberalized market that will give incentive to entrepreneurs who will come up with a solution. But in the earlier version of development discourse, from Alexander Hamilton's infant industry argument through the Latin American structuralists that call for industrialization, and in India, Krishna Bharadwaj and other economists that debated the rural production system. I mean, the domain of production used to be at the heart of development discourse. This was the engine of development. Now that's completely gone. Liberalized market, make it easier to do business, and then everything will follow. Well, this neglect of production is partly because the core of neoliberal economics is neoclassical economics. I mean, these two things are not exactly the same, neoclassical and neoliberal, because there are neoclassical economists like Joe Stiglitz who are not neoliberal. But the core theory is neoclassical economics. And that theory is built to understand the exchange process. And it's not interested in production. Okay, there's something called production function, but it's, this mechanical functional relationship between some homogeneous quanta called capital and homogeneous quanta called labor. You put it in, something comes out at the end. It's a bit like the machine to make sausages. I mean, you don't know how it's made. I mean, you put something in and something comes out. I mean, there's no discussion of, skills and the labor process and the learning and, But this neglect of production is also, in my view, because of the fact that neoliberalism wants to portray capitalism as a harmonious system with a serious relationships of power, which is most visible and visceral in the domain of production. I'll go back to that issue in a few minutes. Now, you may say, well, what of it? I mean, they neglect production, I mean, that's okay, but it's not okay, because this neglect of production in the last few decades has led many post-colonial societies to experience premature deindustrialization. I mean, this term was invented by former Cambridge colleague at the Chilean economist Gabriel Palma. They have, as a result, experienced balance of payments problems, low investment, low growth. Yeah? So this neglect of production matters. Yeah, because it shapes the way you see, understand the economy, and that shape your policy. Yeah? Yeah. So according to the World Bank and others, all you have to do to promote the private sector development is cut the red tape. So that's summarizing the idea of doing business, the ease of doing business, I should say, which has been suspended for politically motivated manipulation of data, and to cut corporation tax. Yeah? I mean, such a kind of the simplistic view of how private sector develops. Yeah. No, think about the corporate income tax. Yeah. I mean, in this country, in Korea, the neoliberal governments have cut corporation tax. But if low corporation tax is so good, why aren't all companies moving to Paraguay? Why aren't they all moving to Bulgaria? Yeah? Corporation income tax in those countries is 10%. Yeah? But why? Well, I know why, because you may pay low price, low tax, but the service you get in return is rubbish. Yeah? Yeah, infrastructure doesn't work, quality of labor force is not good. There are no kind of research scientists. Yeah, yeah. So a lot of companies would rather pay 30% in Germany or 27% in Switzerland and do business there. Yeah? Yeah, so you can debate whether the Indian government or Korean government is delivering the right quality of services given the tax it is charging. That's a totally legitimate debate, but this the debate, the argument that the lower the corporation income tax is, the better it is totally idiotic. Yeah? Yeah, let me give you another example. In the last 25 years, Britain, which has one of the lowest the corporation income tax in Europe, has on average invested 17% of its GDP against 22% in Germany, 23% in France, 26% in Switzerland. Yeah? So how come, if this argument is correct, that there's more investment in countries with much higher corporation income tax? Yeah? Once again, let's look at the evidence. Yeah? Well, the second area that is neglected in the neoliberal economics, because it's gritty, is work. Yeah? Unfortunately, in neoclassical economics, work really doesn't exist. Yeah? In neoclassical theory, work is an inconvenience that people have to put up with so that they can earn money with which they can buy goods and services whose consumption is the ultimate goal of life. So in neoclassical economics, your life ends when you go to work. Yeah? It starts again when you come back home. Yeah? Because it inherently neglects work, even when labor issue is discussed, it is usually only cast in terms of employment. Yeah? And I'm not saying that employment is not important, but other aspects that to do with work, like power struggle during the labor process, health and safety issues, dignity, and the quality of work. Is it interesting? Is it soul destroying? Charlie Chaplin in the 1930s already commented on this in his the brilliant movie Modern Times. Yeah. But even before that, Adam Smith, who emphasized the importance of the division of labor, argue that actually this fine division of labor will make people stupid, yeah? Because they'll repeat that simplistic things all the time. So very unusually for his time, he actually recommended that in order to counter this, we need to provide publicly funded education to workers. Yeah? No, I mean that he was, I mean, in some ways that really bad guy, but you know, in some other ways he was much ahead of his time. Yeah. Yeah, so a lot of issues to do with work is not even discussed. Yeah? But when you think about it, this is outrageous because even in countries with an 8-hour working day, people basically spend half their waking time in work. Yeah? And that half is completely written off. Yeah? And in poorer societies with much longer working time, much more dangers at work and so on, I mean, it's even more important. Yeah? And you completely write that out and say all it matters is what phone that you want to buy. Yeah? Is it Samsung or Apple? Yeah? I mean, how many kilos of potatoes you want to buy? Yeah? The third thing that is missing from neoclassical and therefore the neoliberal discourse is power. Yeah? Well, neoclassical economists that would be loath to talk about power. Yeah, the only power that exists for them is that market power. Yeah? Power that comes from your position as a monopoly supplier or monopsony buyer. Yeah? In theory, the neoclassical economics condemns this, but when it is translated into practice, it is the neoliberal the take is usually that, yeah, they may create some social cost and may exploit customers and suppliers, but you know, aren't these people who have proved themselves to be the fittest, yeah, because they survived this competition, yeah. So we shouldn't be too harsh on them, yeah. Little is said of the structural power that comes from the imbalances in income and wealth. You know, neoclassical economics that takes these things as given and then try to find a way to improve things without changing the existing socio-economic order. Yeah? I'll talk about this more in a minute, but the idea of Pareto improvement, yeah? Is there. So as a result, reform proposals that require changes in the underlying social order are dismissed as unrealistic or even unethical. Yeah? Even less is said of the ideational power, that is the ability to make people think what you want to think. This is far more important than you think that no, not yet. In a minute. Next slide. You know, when Barack Obama tried to introduce this tiny healthcare reform, which essentially was that the government would provide a public insurance which people can take if they cannot or do not want to take private insurance, a lot of Americans came out demonstrating against Obamacare, so-called. Next slide. And I came across this amazing picture in which they said, keep government out of my Medicare. I mean, all these old people who was so brainwashed by the healthcare industry, they didn't realize that Medicare is a government program. Yeah? Can you believe it? Yeah. Yeah, so when you have people like this, why do you need the army? Why do you need the police? Yeah? You know, they'll just police themselves and give you peace. Yeah? Yeah, so given the importance of ideational power, the dominance of neoliberal ideas cannot be taken as the proof of their superiority. Huh? Many neoliberals argue, well, you know, why have we won? Because our ideas are better. Yeah? I mean, that we can talk about that why neoliberalism has won if you're interested. But the most important reason is that the backdrop ideas is hugely affected by existing power structure and money. Yeah. So control over media by the moneyed class, the power structure in the academia, the greater resources and the media exposure all available to the supporters of existing social order. Yeah? So I have discussed all these the bits that neoliberal discourse doesn't touch upon, usually because they are unpalatable for the argument, but sometimes also because they have a very narrow theoretical basis, which makes it neglect a lot of things, yeah, work, yeah, the production. Now, having discussed the selectivity biases of neoliberal discourse and how these biases have made the development discourse blinkered, misleading, and often downright wrong, let me discuss finally the problems arising from the narrow ethical foundation of neoliberal perspective. Neoliberalism takes an individualistic point of view. And yeah, of course, sometimes it's just kind of untrammeled and the inconsistent praise of the individual, whatever that person is, or the particular successful individuals. But if you give them some credit and look at their more systematic, consistent ethical basis, underlying this is the idea of Pareto improvement, yeah, or Pareto optimality. Yeah? Now, when economics first began, it was kind of rather simplistically utilitarian. Yeah? So the greatest happiness of the greatest number, you know, that sort of thing. But then in the early 20th century, Vilfredo Pareto, this half Italian, half French economist who taught in Switzerland, and his followers came up against this and said, but if you do it like that, you are recommending essentially a tyranny of the majority. Yeah? Yeah, so you are saying that in order to improve everyone's welfare, you can sacrifice one person. But if you can sacrifice one, why not two? Why not six? Yeah, why not 6 million? Yeah, yeah. So before you know it, you're in the same bed with Hitler and Stalin. Yeah, you know what is the lives of 6 million Jews for the benefit of 80 million Germans? Yeah, you know what is the problem with sacrificing 3 million kulaks for the benefit of 130 million peasants? Yeah. Yeah, so actually the Pareto and his followers were making a very important stand. Yeah? You cannot do it like this. Yeah? So they proposed that no social change should be called an improvement unless it hurts no one, while making at least some people better off. Yeah? This is a very noble stand against the tyranny of the majority. Yeah? So I take it very seriously, but my view is that when you take any ethical principle to extreme, it becomes a monster. Yeah, yeah, so according to this ethical position, even if your country has a very unequal distribution of income, yeah, you can then even take 1 penny without consent from the rich people. Yeah? You cannot change the existing laws about, I don't know, inheritance or the women's rights and so on, because that will hurt. Yeah. the people who have been benefiting from it. Yeah. So this gives a inherent conservative bias to the doctrine. Yeah. Okay, I mean, even accepting that there are clever neoclassical economists like Stiglitz and Krugman and so on who have come up with all sorts of reform proposals. Yeah? But they would not go to, well, Stiglitz is now quite different, but at least in the old days, they would not go to shaking up existing social order because that will be a violation of Pareto optimality. Yeah? So I'm not trying to suggest that we have to ditch this particular ethical point of view and adopt something else, the collectivist view or whatever. Yeah? Basically, my view is that we cannot make judgments in a complex world without considering differing views. Sorry, that in a complex world with people with differing views on the basis of a single ethical position. Yeah? I think all we can do is to be more open about the ethical basis on which you are making your policy proposals and evaluations, and have a more honest dialogue between people with different ethical positions. Yeah? So I'm not advocating completely ditching these Paretian ideas, but on the other hand, you have to acknowledge its limit, what kind of conservative bias it gives to society, and we have to consider all the more collectivist structuralist views as well as Amartya Sen's capabilities approach and other ethical positions. Yeah? Because what the neoclassical economists in practice does isn't even following their ethical principle. Yeah? Because when they recommend that we should sign this pre-trade agreement because it gives us this much benefit, yeah? They are actually behaving like the old utilitarians. Yeah? I mean, of course, given this conservative bias of Pareto optimality, people like Hicks and Caldo came up with this idea of compensation principle, which said that if the gains from all the winners are bigger than the gains, losses from all the losers, you can make this social change and still be consistent with Pareto's ideas. Yeah? But there's an important proviso. Yeah? The compensation has to be made. Yeah? So unless these people recommending some free trade agreement, some land deal with I don't know, Korean corporation or whatever, cannot actually give you a credible compensation mechanism, they are not being consistent. Yeah? But once again, I mean they'll just go ahead and recommend whatever they like, yeah? Because they are backed up by the status quo. Okay, let me conclude. In this lecture, I have discussed how the intellectual bias of neoliberalism that neglects, if not deliberately hides, important issues to do with history, power, production, work, and so on, have created an incomplete and unbalanced development discourse, which has in turn resulted in poor social economic outcomes. Also, the narrowly individualistic ethical framework of neoliberalism has created a development discourse that has an inherent conservative bias, making social and economic reforms more difficult. So I argue that we need to talk about development in a more honest way and with a broader range of ethical positions. Food experts say that if you are going to eat animals, eat the whole beast. Yeah? No, I mean this used to be what people did, but these days in rich industrial societies, people only eat what they call choice cuts and then throw the rest. Yeah? Same with vegetables. Yeah? I mean we used to eat all parts of vegetable. Now they might eat the leaves, yeah, and throw the rest. Yeah, it's environmentally bad, yeah, and it's not good for your health. Yeah? Moreover, in the same way in which being open to different kinds of cuisine lets us enjoy a more varied, exciting, and potentially healthier diet, we should think about the development with a more varied range of ethical positions. Yeah? So we need to eat the whole beast, yeah, if you are going to eat an animal, and cook it according to different culinary traditions so that we can have a healthier, more balanced, and more exciting diet when we talk about the development. Thank you very much. So should I go there or? Yeah.
You could address questions from here too,
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you want, as you prefer. Thank you so much, Hajun, for that lucid, perceptive, and illuminating lecture, which has been a fascinating discourse. I expected nothing less, but this is a wonderful start to the Silver Jubilee celebrations of the Institute for Human Development. Thank you. You know, time and patience are both exhaustible resources. Therefore, much as I would have liked to have a lengthier question time, I don't think we have the luxury, because we will 20 minutes from now be left with hardly anyone in the room. So may I suggest the following, that we'll spend 10, 12 minutes on Q&A. Yeah? And I would urge you to stay until we are complete. The only compensation I can offer is traffic jams get less dense. So stay on. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to take any of the questions that have come from our online listeners. It would be virtually impossible. So let me take one question each from these rows. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so this column, as it were, has an advantage. Okay, let me begin with the row to my right. The first hand I see. I'll take all the 4 questions in that and pass them on to Hajun to address them together. So do I see any hand raised from that? None. Very hesitant. Go ahead, but please ask a question, not a comment.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was an exciting lecture, and I've been following your work quite a lot.
Question, please.
Question basically is that, do you think these AI and all the new technologies coming in, its employment consequences, do you think we can handle it, or it's going to be a big crisis?
Anyone from here? Okay, I see a gentleman in a blue pullover here. And yeah, question, please.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. My question is that given the change that has taken place in developmental discourse, even the importance of history and all that you talked about, the way I see it, even this little space that we had where we can, have a critique of what is going on. As you said, the multiplicity of approaches has to be there to understand the complexity of development process. The big data driven experimental economics, behavioral economics, I see it as a big threat to whatever we, understand. What is have very serious consequences for the outcomes. I would like you to say, something about what is the future of development economics, given that it is coming in a big way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So if anyone from that row, from this one? Yes, please, I see your hand. Yep, gentleman at that corner, yep.
Thank you, sir, for the presentation. My question is, since you've shown that from 1960s to 1980s, the continent of Africa or Latin America were doing much better. And from 1980s to 2018, they declined. So I'm asking, is it possible for African continents to revert perhaps to protectionist development approach? Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Okay,
Hudson. Yeah.
thank you for those the exciting questions. Yeah, AI and employment, the history of capitalism has been a history of automation. Yeah? So actually what has changed is not automation, but the nature of automation. Yeah? Why is there so much panic about the artificial intelligence? Because it is now affecting basically the so-called middle-class jobs. Yeah? These people that who write about the disappearance of jobs and so on, these economists, journalists, they used to criticize blue-collar workers resisting technological change, telling them, but this is what capitalism is, just suck it. Yeah. Now that is the job of their spouses and friends and children, they are panicking. Yeah. I smell rank class hypocrisy here. Yeah? So my view is that we will be able to deal with this with appropriate public intervention, because I don't think overall there'll be reduction of jobs. Yeah? There'll be sectoral changes and sectoral imbalances. So you need the compensation program, retraining program, replacement program. Yeah? But overall, I'm not worried, yeah, because this is what capitalism is, yeah. But for particular types of workers, for particular countries, it could create a huge problem. I mean, India should be worried because the services that you used to be exporting, the accounting, yeah, the jobs, the reading MRI scans and so on. I mean, they're all going to be done by machines in the next 10, 20 years, yeah. So this country has to be worried. Those people have to be worried. Yeah. But if someone tells me, well, the jobs are disappearing, yeah, I don't believe them. Yeah. Well, once again, in the book, there's a chapter called Strawberry, which talks about this. Yeah. Once again, please pirate copy the book. Yeah, the so-called empirical turn in economics. Well, first of all, a lot of it is a fad. Yeah. When I was doing my PhD, everyone was studying new growth theory. Yeah? When I finished my PhD, everyone was studying game theory. Yeah? So economists have to find jobs. They are all doing new things. I think it's too late for you young people to start PhD on the experimental economics, neuroeconomics, because
It's past.
yeah, it's yesterday's fashion. Yeah. So think about something completely different. Yeah? But I think that this is quite a worrying turn, because it is, as you suggested, especially with big data, is mindless. Yeah? I mean, you don't know history, you don't know the context, you don't have any ethical compass. You just crunch numbers with brutal forces, and then you get some result, and then yeah. Yeah, but then this is what economists have been doing all the time. Yeah, I mean, all these econometrics are trying to prove that tropical climate is bad for economic development. Africa doesn't grow because it has bad geography. I mean, they were all doing this mindless number crunching. So there's nothing new there. But now it has the aura of greater scientific standing, because now you are doing something kind of more complicated in terms of equations and the programs that you are using. But with this, some of these, I have a serious problem, because ethical problem, because now economists think they can play God. No, seriously. I mean, they descend on the 3 villages in Malawi. Give half the people the fertilizer, don't give them the other half any fertilizer. They write a PhD, but have they ever thought about the impact that this is going to have on these people's lives? Yeah, maybe positive, but what right do they have to intervene in poor people's lives like that? Yeah. Well, if they do this experiment with rich people, I wouldn't be so much against. Yeah, but Yeah, actually, I have a personal experience with this. I have a paper coming out in Cambridge Journal of Economics after having been rejected by 15 mainstream journals on the ideology in economics. Yeah? So I and my co-authors, the Iranian Canadian, did this randomized controlled trials on economists. Yeah? Basically asked them, but after giving them like 20 or so statements which are critical of the mainstream economics, which almost all of which were actually said by mainstream economists. Yeah, we give them false sources. Yeah, so Paul Romer says something critical about the macroeconomics. What happens if we say that this is said by Yanis Varoufakis? Yeah. The argument that the level fell significantly. Yeah? So we prove that the economists have ideological biases. I mean, that's not what is important. The important thing is that once we told these people that this is what we intended at the end of the survey, and some of them flew into rage. Yeah? How dare you? Yeah? Well, you do it to all the poor people in India and Ghana. Why can't we do it to you? Yeah? No, some of them actually even threatened my co-author, who's at that point didn't have a tenure, that I make sure that you never get a tenure job in a North American university. Yeah? No, these people are mafiosi. Yeah? They're not scholars anymore. Anyway, so yeah, I'm very worried, but I mean, at another level, not too worried. Yeah. Can Africa develop, reindustrialize? Yes, of course you can. Yeah. No, I mean, just think about my native country, South Korea. Yeah? You know, in 1961, South Korea had per capita income of $93. Yeah? In the same year, Ghana had $190. Yeah? Senegal had $370. Yeah? The country that developed exactly by using structuralist policies. Yeah? Now, if someone tells me, oh, but Africans cannot do it, Latin Americans cannot do it, I call that person a racist. Yeah? There's nothing special about Koreans. Yeah? I mean, a lot of Koreans want to think that, but I don't. Yeah. So that you can do it if you follow the right policies. Yeah. Of course, there were problems with the old import substitution model. Yeah. Yeah. Let me just summarize it in one quick kind of half-joking anecdote. In the 1960s, neither Brazilians, nor Indians, nor Koreans could make nice cars. Huh? The Brazilian approach was, we cannot build nice cars, but we want nice cars. Yeah. So let's invite foreign companies, Renault, Fiat, Ford, and ask them to come and build nice cars. Yeah. So the rich people drove around in nice cars, but they never developed indigenous automobile industry. Yeah? The Indian approach was, we don't want nice cars. Nice cars are imperialist conspiracies. Yeah? And they kept reproducing 1950s at the Austin Ambassador until the 80s when the Indian auto industry became a joke. Yeah, yeah, and then they switched to the Brazilian model. Yeah, now we want nice cars, so let's invite the foreign companies. Yeah, the Korean approach and before that the Japanese approach was, we cannot build nice cars, we can only build shit cars, but we are going to drive around in shit cars until we can build nice cars. Yeah? So that all three countries practiced protectionism, but the intents were different. Yeah? And the other supplementary policies are different. So I'm not saying that you can just turn the clock back to 1964, yeah, and do whatever you are doing then. Yeah? But yeah, I mean, with the suitable modifications, with the different, if you like, type of lateral thinking, you can do it. Yeah, why not? Yeah? Except for the environmental constraints, but that's another story. And developing countries shouldn't be concerned with that. Yeah. It's upon the rich countries to control that. That's what climate justice is about. Yeah?
Thank you once again, Hajun, for your quick, brief answers. Can I just pitch the mic?
yeah.
This one doesn't seem to be
it's not
working.
yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to assure you that we will be brief. I will be brief in my closing remarks, and Ravi will be brief in his vote of thanks. So kindly bear with us. Hajun is a master in the art of using stories, examples, anecdotes to construct, and he does so laced with wit and humor, as you witnessed in this lecture, to construct a narrative which actually creates a big picture and establishes that the whole is not simply different from, it is greater than the sum total of the parts. And each of his books have a simple takeaway, a simple model of the story. Kicking away the ladder, which might have been used by Frederick List, but originated in the work of Alexander Hamilton and was subsequently implemented by Bismarck in Germany, that those who climb to the top then kick away from the ladder for others not to follow in their footsteps. Or the bad Samaritans, do as we say, not as we did. Or 23 things that they didn't tell you about capitalism. I'll give you just two examples. What is good for General Motors is not necessarily good for the United States. Or the poor countries have better entrepreneurs than rich countries. These are just examples. Now, what this lecture did, in my view, was, in a sense, to construct a bigger picture from the work that he's been doing over the past decade. Work that has reached out to a large number of readers in 40 languages? 44 languages. And books have sold in millions. Now, economists are incapable of doing that. They write only for themselves. And that's part of their problem. So I think what Hajun is doing has been very important for the profession. It's this simple way of communicating powerful ideas. And he did so once more. So I hope, Hajun, that you will build on this big picture that comes together from your 4 different books. I didn't mention Economics, the User's Guide, but if you want to study how ideology drives economics and how economics functions in a way as if people do not exist, or if they exist, they do not matter. It also makes for fascinating reading. The other proposition I want to say something about is the significance of the Institute of Human Development. We are small, but it packs a big punch. It exercises influence. It has convening power. It does things that other people do not do, will not do, or do not wish to do. Okay. Now, I think the times we live in are very strange. Once upon a time, Adam Smith writes that the wealth of nations depends, in effect, on the well-being of its people. So that the relationship between economics and human development, to him, was quite explicit. Yet, what we find over the past 50 years or longer is that economics has become narrower and narrower in its concerns, while the idea of human development has become broader and broader in conception. So that even if, there are almost no intersections now, there are very few intersections. Economics, which was at one time concerned with economic growth and economic efficiency, is now concerned much more with balanced budgets and price stability rather than economic growth and full employment. People don't matter. Human development, on the other hand, has come a long way from thinking about well-being of people in terms of per capita income, which is no more than an arithmetic means that does not capture the living conditions of the poorest. Yeah, but it got broader slowly. So you had people like David Morris, The Quality of Life, or Dudley Sears saying, you know, development is about reducing poverty, inequality, and unemployment, and you move to sort of basic human needs, and then ultimately to a more broader conception of human development. It is a very strange world. Economics has become narrower with the passage of time, and concerns about human development have become much broader. And I see very few intersections. And I actually believe that the IHD is serving a very important role in this domain. I forgot, I wanted to add to and I will end very soon. I want to say that I'd add two examples to your selectivity bias. You mentioned Bhagwati and Ron Finlay. Okay, they are orthodox economists. But most people think of Gunnar Myrdal as a kind of founder of the idea of the welfare state. He wrote a book in 3 volumes, Asian Drama, in 2,300 odd pages, where history begins in the interwar period.
Wow.
1919 to 1939. He writes about Asia as if there was no time before 1918. Little recognizing, I think he was not even conscious of it, that the underdevelopment of Asia, about which he was so damning, was actually a consequence of European imperialism. And the second is your selectivity bias in inventing history, if you say, or rewriting history, or distorting history. You know, if we look at the period 1850 to 1950, that 100 years, the second half of the 19th and the first half of the 20th century, the 3 countries that practiced free trade, and Hajun knows this well, with tariffs of less than 3% on average, were India, China, and Indonesia. At the end of that century, the share of Asia in world GDP collapsed from 56%, those 100 years, to 9%. So that was the outcome of the free trade doctrine. So I thought, let me just add for our audience these 2 examples. May I simply say that it was important for me to say something at the end, both about Hajun and his work and about the Institute of Human Development. I have done that much more briefly than I would have otherwise. I'd now like to invite Ravi Srivastav to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Deepak. I'm indeed privileged to be able to give the vote of thanks at this celebratory occasion for the Institute for Human Development. First of all, to Hajun, we've been wanting him to come here for some time, and he's also been wanting to be with us. It didn't happen. I'm sure this has happened the first time, and it'll happen soon again. Hajun, we look forward to seeing you. It's a personal privilege for me to thank him because I've known him for about 3.5 decades since he first came to Cambridge as a student. His books, along with those of Dr. Deepak Nair, were compulsory readings in the course that we had designed on development theory and experience. But believe it or not, this is the first time in 3.5 decades that I'm hearing him speak. And as Deepak pointed out, the wit and the humor and the anecdotes and the passion also comes through in the books, but it comes through far more clearly when he speaks like this. Thank you, Hajun, for this very scintillating lecture and for being with us today. I'm sure that all of us have gained a great deal from your lecture. Uh, Let me thank this wonderful audience, the offline audience, and the several hundred people who've come online for coming here to listen to you. They're also almost all of them. And believe me, in the online audience would include many of our global friends, not only from India, but also from abroad. They have been friends of IHD. And of course, they've been looking forward to this lecture for quite some time. So thank you very much. You busted the myth that the COVID has made all of us lazy. So thank you again. You know, we are going to have, this is the 25th year, and we are going to have a long list of celebrations. I'll mention some of the events later on. The credit for being in the 25th year goes to many people, but most of all, the faculty and the staff of IHD who work tirelessly to make IHD what it is. They're, you know, almost in extremely difficult circumstances, financial circumstances, working circumstances, and so on. And the commitment to what IHD stands for is exemplary. So let me thank the entire faculty and staff of IHD. Priyanka, of course, is very much at the hub of the entire set of celebrations, along with Jyoti, along with everybody else, for being, again, part of this one-year process, the celebratory process. IHD would not have been what it is without a vast network of friends and supporters, both within, in Delhi, in all parts of the country, and even abroad. You know, I was one among them for 20 odd years before I became a part of IHD for 4.5 years. And they've been strung along, you know, by this vast, what is it? The neutron, you know, the person sucking in all the energy and exhibiting energy, called Alak Sharma, our director. There used to be an anecdote which all of us actually used to cite about him for many years, that he is, you know, he's George Orwell. He knows the waking time of each and every person, not only in IHD and ISLE, because they're bound to receive a call from him within the first 15 or half hour of waking, reminding them of the task that IHD has to do over the next day or week and so on. So he's been like that. And I've seen how, you know, the great institutions in India were built by people over the last 100 years or more, by people who went around literally with a begging bowl, you know, who collected this vast circuit of supporters and friends and build institutions. And I've seen how Alak did back-breaking work to build IHD. First to build ISLE and the journal, to rebuild ISLE and the journal, and then to build IHD. Back-breaking literally because in those old days, I remember he had a serious back problem. And the only mode of transport he used was a scooter, which made things worse for him every day. So for years, for many, many years, he went around, he was everywhere in Delhi on that scooter, soliciting ideas, friends, support, and of course, in a way that is exemplary participatory, which is why this network of friends and the commitment that you see around the place, he is really the hub and the anchor. And he has the kind of energy with 20-year-olds who are associated with IHD, you know, think at some stage, at least when they reach his age, of being able to exhibit, because they can't when they're 20. So that is the kind of person he is. So thank you all for this, you know, bringing us here at the 25th year. We are planning a year-long celebrations, which will consist, this is the first lecture. And again, as I said, we are very proud to have Hajun here, giving us, I mean, Hajun's work is in deconstructing neoliberalism and giving us a simple story about the concrete experience of development is exemplary. Is one of the, I think, you know, that is why his books and his writings are so well known all over the world. Over the next 1 year, we are planning to have 8 to 10 lectures. And I'm sure you'll receive messages when these lectures are organized. There will be 3 national conferences. In April, there will be a conference on the future of work. In July, this will be followed by a conference on women and work. And at the end of this period, this 25 years period, we will be having a global conference on advancing human development in the contemporary world. So we are planning this year Thank you very much for coming with us. It's really a great pity that some of our anchors and supporters, we have missed out. We have not been able to, they have not been able to join this function. In the very recent past, Dr. Rohini Nair, Dr. Alag, Dr. Radhakrishna, and just 2 days ago, our friend, Dr. Ajit Ghosh, who was really the intellectual anchor, frankly, the intellectual anchor of our work on labor and employment in IHD. And we were looking forward to his stewardship in the India Employment Report, which we will soon be bringing out in collaboration with the ILO. They left us, but they're here in spirit to guide us. Thank you all, and thank you for being here. Thanks.
Thank you. This is just the beginning. We will continue through the year.